Joining us now is Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Scheller. Honored to have him on the program, who is leading a charge to help confirm Pete Hegseth. Great to see you, sir. Thank you for taking the time. Please introduce your background on how you first met Pete Hegseth and why you're so passionate for his confirmation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. I'm a lieutenant colonel from the United States Marine Corps, served in Iraq and Afghanistan, combat vet. My whole life has been serving this country over the GWAT generation, the same wars that Pete Hegseth fought in. I got out under weird circumstances on August 26, 2021 during the Afghanistan withdrawal. There was just a long list of mistakes that I saw. I've got a master's in military science. I've been studying foreign policy my whole career, and it was just obvious the mistakes that were happening. And I had been playing the game long enough to know that no one was going to be held accountable. So I made a video in my uniform demanding accountability of my senior military leaders. And at the time, I didn't mention any politician, and it wasn't political. I thought holding senior military leaders accountable would be like one of the last apolitical things we could all agree upon. But when you get thrust into the stratosphere of these types of things, it's hyper political, and that's kind of what happened. Every headline was Lieutenant Colonel Scheller criticizes President Biden, when at the time I wasn't saying anything about President Biden. I was just sick of the apathy and the lack of accountability in the senior military ranks. Well, after that, I was fired, later given a gag order, imprisoned in solitary confinement, court-martialed, and drummed out of the military short of my retirement. And that was a 6-month process. It didn't happen quickly, and I didn't make a single interview during that whole process. Meanwhile, the media was slandering me. The Marine Corps released my medical records to an article called Task and Purpose, and it was, they were comparing me to all these things, the classic Hitler, white supremacist, all the things that, the left will try and do. And at the time, I wasn't even familiar with all that because I was just a Marine, wanted to serve my country. I was like thrown in the fire of getting a PhD in left-wing political tactics. So I got out Christmas Eve 2021, and then I hit the media circuit for the first time. And I did all the shows. I did Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Laura Ingraham, Jocko's podcast. I went on the PBD podcast. But one of them was Pete Hegseth. So I did a Fox and Friends hit with him. And then I ended up writing a book. And when the book came out, I went out and promoted, did another hit with Pete. And then he actually brought me to Tennessee to do a 1-hour in-person segment called Modern Warriors. And actually Waltz, the incoming national security advisor, was one of the 5 people. So it's kind of an interesting show. And you go back and look at that now of all the picks. But Pete's just, to me, always been one of those down-to-earth guys. I feel like in a lot of ways I see myself in him, and I think that's why all the warriors are rallying around him. And so, after I wrote my book, I did media for another 2 years. Everyone wanted me to go into politics, and I'm just not a politician. I've always loved the military and been focused on wanting to make the military stronger. And I kind of just went out and started living life, started a business, and dropped out a little bit. And it wasn't until Pete got the nomination and everyone started attacking and canceling him with the anonymous sources that I felt the need to get involved.
So how have those meetings been going, and what exactly are you doing to help lobby people on Capitol Hill for Pete Hegseth?
Yeah, the takeaway is, bottom line, the warrior class overwhelmingly wants Pete Hegseth. I called everyone. If you remember Scott Mann, the Operation Pineapple guy, if you remember Matthew Lohmeyer, who asked the question to President Trump, I've talked to all these guys on the phone, the Black Rifle Coffee guys, Eddie Gallagher. The list goes on and on. I've talked to probably 50 influential military influencers. Not a single one doesn't overwhelmingly support Pete Hegseth. I've spoken to the congressmen that I respect the most, whether it's Mast, Mills, these actual warriors of our generation, they all support Pete Hegseth. And so first step was making sure that I could get the pulse of the community. And once I realized that the pulse of the community absolutely wanted him, I had to figure out how I could, unify this voice. So what I've done is I've gathered up all the petitions out there, because there's a Navy SEAL petition with over 3,000 signatures. There's a Heritage Foundation petition. There's a Green Beret petition. There's a Vets for Pete petition. So I've gathered all of these up. And then I plan to go up to Capitol Hill on Wednesday and meet with U.S. senators and their staffs that are willing to talk to me. So I've got at least 10 meetings on Wednesday, which is huge. And, one of them, like Ricketts' office, who's meeting with us, he's the chair of the Senate Armed Forces Committee, being able to hand him these petitions and tell him exactly what I'm telling you. Pete Hegseth is obviously a smart guy, Princeton, Harvard, great orator on Fox and Friends. But the reason that veterans want him so bad is because he's an outside establishment pick. Not only is a combat veteran from our generation, but the last two general officers have literally gone from the board of the military industrial complex, the SecDef, and then they go back. Austin is Raytheon, Mattis was General Dynamics, Dunford, Lockheed Martin. I mean, it's the ties to the military industrial complex is a real problem. But even more so, these senior military leaders that get selected, they protect the status quo. Why? Because their authority comes from navigating the current system. And the current system is what needs overhauled. And that's why I think someone like Pete Hegseth is so important.